Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first morning panel, The Return of the Crypto Wars, Protecting Encryption. My name is Buchta. I'm a lawyer by profession and I work for the European Data Protection Supervisor. I have the pleasure of being the chair of this panel this morning. In addition, of course, to the very important role of redressing the gender imbalance slightly, because as we know, all male panels are so 20th century. So, Simon here, as you know, one of the pioneers of the privacy movement, a fearless fighter against institutional barbarism, and the founder of Privacy International, presently of Code Red, will be moderating, and he will also introduce our speakers in a minute. So just let me briefly set the scene. When I see that we are discussing, again, the crypto wars and encryption, I have to say, well, and by the way, I think this is one of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 panels and events in this conference which have encryption in their title or description, so it seems to be a really hot topic. I am really tempted to ask, quoting the classic, that is John Oliver, how is this still a thing? I hope we will find out today. So for those of you in the room who are maybe too young to remember, the first crypto wars were about, 20 years ago. The term usually refers to the US government attempts to limit access of the public to strong and foreign nations to strong encryption that would resist attempts of government agencies, in particular the NSA, to decrypt them. Some of you may remember the discussions about export controls, the so-called dual use or military technologies. Encryption was classified as such at the time. There was the Clipper chip debate, the famous chipset developed by the NSA and promoted as an encryption device for telecoms networks to encrypt voice telephony. However, it came with a catch, that is a backdoor in the form of a key escrow, essentially. Then after, well, obviously it never worked. It was never picked up. There was strong resistance from the privacy community, industry, the public. So how come that we are now again talking about the return of the crypto wars? Well, fast forward to 2013, Snowden revelations, growing public awareness and a certain unease of the industry that started to propose encrypted solutions for communications. Since iOS 8, we have iPhones encrypted with the user holding the key. We have iMessage, Signal, Threema, all the other applications that many of you probably use. Faced with that, governments, agencies started getting nervous. And we have seen, especially since the terrorist attacks in Paris, that the debate really returned with a vengeance to the political scene, with politicians in many countries calling again for backdoors, secret golden keys, whatever you call this idea. Although, to my knowledge, no real evidence was put forward to show that encrypted communications really played a role in preparation of those attacks. So we have seen legislative proposals or discussions in France, in the UK, discussions in the US, although there have been some mixed messages, if I remember correctly, with some agencies going a bit softer, the others saying, no, we absolutely need access to plain text. An encouraging sign was a document produced by the Dutch government recently stating that they recognize the need for strong encryption and they do not see the need for any initiatives at political level that would undermine that. As you know, the Dutch hold the current presidency of the EU, so that probably means that we will not see anything of that sort coming in the next 6 months. But who knows what will happen after that. So, over to Simon for introduction of our speakers and for the moderation.
Very generous. Hello again. We've got a stellar panel here. I'm extremely proud to introduce them. Many of these fellows are old friends and colleagues, and all have influenced the world substantially. I'll do the introductions now to get that part done with. William Binney, Bill Binney, if not the, certainly one of the, but certainly recognized as the most influential and talented code breaker in American history, is a whistleblower, former technical director of the National Security Agency. Now he slipped somewhat and is now technical director of Code Red. We can't give him quite the salary he got in the NSA, I'm afraid. There's a film on Bill's life which has been released, which is in, it's just about 1:15, isn't it, on Friday, called A Good American, which you're all welcome to attend. It's a remarkable film about the history of crypto and code breaking in America and worldwide. Duncan Campbell, next to Bill, exceptional, very influential investigative journalist from the United Kingdom. Anybody, and many of you will know Duncan. He has inspired so much interest, so much change in terms of secret Britain and in terms of people's awareness of the importance of citizen action. Again, very proud to know and have worked with Duncan. Gus Hosein, we go back probably 400 years. Gus worked with me for more than a decade, 15 years in Privacy International. He's now running Privacy International. He's one of the most accomplished privacy professionals in the world, an absolute beacon for so many people. And Bart Preneel at the end from KU Leuven, very accomplished professor, a maths genius, and specialist in cryptography. And Bart will be giving us some substance in this issue. Now, we've deliberately kept the subject matter flexible and fluid, and that's not laziness on our part. It's that we figure so much is happening in this field, we've got to provide that flexibility. But one thing that is inflexible is we're 7 to 8 minutes each. I'll bang this bottle on the table at 7 minutes and go after 8. So, and in fact, yes, they'll be joined by the audience doing that sound. So, so Bill, can you kick off and give us the big picture on all of this issue?
Okay, sure. But first, I think I should give you a little bit of my background so you understand where I'm coming from. I worked for NSA for 32 years as a civilian and 4 years in the military prior to that. So a little over 36 years, almost, I had credit for 37 plus years for retirement. But in that whole period of time, I only ever worked on crypt systems and codes and ciphers for the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So I was always looking at military things, never civilian, and never anything that was commercially available until recently. And the film that Simon had mentioned does go into that, and it gets into how actually the system that they're currently using to spy on the world was designed by me in the 90s in a SIGINT Automation Research Center, which there's discussion of that in the film also. But the whole idea was to automate the SIGINT process, meaning we had a lot of people who didn't know how to approach code ciphers or any kinds of systems. So my objective internally in NSA at the time was to automate that process as much as possible, so that we would remove people from that process, and then in the end they would be presented with results that they could then fine-tune. So in other words, I was trying to limit what people had to do, take away the burden of a lot of kind of mundane work and ordering things and sequencing things, and in terms of codes and ciphers and recognition of things of that nature and how you do that. And we call those things diarizing routines. And so that would go through and run through and categorize everything. So that was my main thrust until I became the technical director of what I called the World, which was the title of the organization I was the technical director was the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis and Reporting Shop. So it was about 6,000 of the 35,000 people at NSA. And their job was to analyze traffic, code, ciphers, and data and relationships in the world in terms of communications and also signals. And figure things out, intentions and capabilities, which is what they're supposed to do. They've lost sight of that now. Now they wait till somebody gets killed by a terrorist attack, then they go figure out who did it and who was associated with them. And find out, of course, that they knew them all in advance, but they did nothing about it because they're doing this bulk acquisition. That's one of the things I testified to in the House of Lords recently, that their whole objective is to now do a forensics job. That's a police job. That's not intelligence. So they've lost perspective on that. So, but since then, going back to my story, I was developing systems to be able to analyze information starting in 1998. The systems I was designing, I was targeting to be able to diagnose what was important in roughly 20 terabytes a minute, and then I was going to scale up from there to get to the world's communications rates. In other words, I was trying to design a system that would look into all the communications, see what was important, and pull that out, and only that. So that fundamentally everything else would just pass by and everybody would have privacy. There would be no invasion of anybody's activity at all, unless you were in some way associated with some criminal activity or some government operations. So those were the kinds of things I was doing, and that was the whole objective of that. But the problem was we had to design a system to be able to first look at things in terms of the internet. That meant sessionizing everything, to be able to diagnose it as to whether or not it was important to pull in or not. So when you do that, that also gives you the capability to capture it all and take it all in. That was the big problem. All the algorithms we built suppressed any of that and only pulled in relevant data. But they removed, that was one of the first things they did, was to remove that filtering so that they could take in everything. And that's what they're doing now. And then after that, we had other programs that followed on to that simply said, if you were a known target, okay, we would look at you and know who you were and follow your identity all the way through the system. Otherwise, if you weren't known, but you were somebody new who was falling to what we call the zone of suspicion, that is, you were becoming, your behavior was that of us being associated with this criminal activity or whatever it was. But we didn't know that you were a target for sure, then we would encrypt all your attributes at that point, and so that people like the FBI couldn't come in and investigate you because you wouldn't know what to look for, because everything was encrypted and they couldn't actually, and you couldn't do at NSA, you couldn't go in and do love intelligence, look to see if your lover is cheating on you, you know. So you couldn't, that was not possible at that point. So none of that was available for anybody to abuse. And our process was we would say we would never decrypt that until such time as we showed probable cause and could justify a warrant in a court. So we're trying to follow the law and the Constitution of the United States and also give privacy to everybody in the world at the same time, because it was totally irrelevant to pull in data on everybody on the planet like they're doing today. That's just irrelevant. And all that does is bury your analysts with a bunch of data that is totally meaningless. And it wastes their time. They fail to recognize threats in advance. That's why people get killed. And then they come afterward and they look at the bulk data that they've collected. Oh, sure, we got a lot of data and we knew all these people. Yes, and we could have done that if we focused beforehand. That was my whole point to the House of Lords. If they focused on a targeted professional job, which is not what they're doing now, they would have been able to at least detect some of these attacks and stop them before they happened and save people's lives. But they're not doing that. And they're not doing it very slowly. And the money and the program gets into why they're not doing that, gets into the money motivation. That's been the whole thing from the very beginning. But most of it, like all the attacks, basically could have been detected, had nothing to do with encryption. They were all done on the social networks or short messaging, kinds of things like that. All that's been found through just follow up stuff into the bulk data they've got. It's all been there all along. So there was no reason. It was true also in 9/11. I mean, they even gave the date of the attack in text. I mean, they did little pictures beforehand, and all that was in the NSA databases, and they didn't recognize it. Why? Because they had too much data. That's why we tried to build that program that we were. Even back then, they had too much data. So, and now with the capacity to collect after we developed the ability to sessionize at fiber optic rates, now they, this was in 1998, but now they have too much data in orders of magnitude, so much more than they ever had. So it's even worse now. So it's, my point to them is if they don't change and start and do a targeted approach and a professional job, they're dooming their entire societies and all of the free world to a continuation of people dying before they follow up to stop people who are a part of these activities. So, and their main focus, though, they use every one of these to go and attack encryption as the mean boy in the barn that's hiding all this stuff, when in fact that's an absolute lie. Right? They're using it, though, as a lever to try to get rid of encryption. Because in intelligence, you like the window to be open so you can read everything that everybody's sending, okay? So you want to be able to read things. Well, in the Soviet Union, a lot of things weren't possible, so we basically developed all those techniques to do it by metadata and transactional relationships between entities without being able to read a thing. So, and that's basically what they could still do, even if they adopted encryption, but they simply have lost that technique. So their profession is going down the drain, and they're trying to fix it by saying we need a window into encryption, when in fact they've already got it. Most of the programs that are commercially available run through NIST for testing, and all of that means that NSA has the algorithms, and they also have ways and means of penetrating things, so they have the ability to insert things so that things like, well, you can change your key if you want, and we'll make it look like you're using your key, but you're really using ours. You know, that kind of thing. So they can play games like that. All those things are possible. And, of course, they have the muscular program that Snowden exposed that, you know, were the back doors and the weaknesses they were building into encryption. So, my problem with that was that's kind of short-sighted thinking. Of course, they are short-sighted thinkers. Because I know most of them anyway. That's why I left there. I couldn't take it anymore. So, but the point is that that's very short-sighted. I mean, NSA or GCHQ or any of them over here don't really have a monopoly on smart people. So if you build a weakness into a system, everybody has the opportunity to detect it and break into it and open that window and read it. So that's fundamentally, and they do the same thing with firewalls and networks. And any kind of protection system that you try to build in, why they put weaknesses into that. And well, that builds it in for everybody. That's why Office of Personnel Management got broken into by the Chinese, and they took all the data on all the people who had ever submitted for a clearance in the United States. That was 21 million people, from CIA, NSA, DIA, FBI, all of them, including me. I got my notice too. So the Chinese had all of my data from OPM. Now, all those files have our standard form 86, SF86, which lists your entire history, all of your work history, all of your financial history, all of your relationships, friends, family, and so on, where you lived and everything. So your entire life is in there. But what that does is it gives the Chinese every name of everybody that's ever been involved in any intelligence activity in the United States government, which means they can look around all the embassies and consulates around the world and see who's involved in it and who are the intelligence people. So that gives them that in there too. So, but all of this is really based on stupid assumptions based on our government. They're all idiots, and they're doing this, and we're all suffering because of that. I mean, we're paying for all of it too. And so we pay for all this so that we get killed so that they say we need to pay more. This is insane, okay?
Duncan. Thank you. Is this on? Okay, thank you. I was recently very pleased and proud to have arranged for Bill to come and testify to our Parliament in London as it starts to debate a horrendous new raft of proposed legal powers to enable, or in many cases legitimate, surveillance of the internet and what people do. Bill's contribution that he sort of outlined here was to try and get it across to, frankly, a very dim audience in terms of technical understanding, that it is neither necessary nor actually helpful to go for everyone's communications in order to defeat the threats to civil society and security. Whether they have listened to or taken in any part of that 35 years experience from the person who actually invented the technology that gets into the internet with his team, I do not know. What I do know very clearly is that the target of the Signal Intelligence Agency, SIGINT for short, the NSA, Bill worked for Britain's GCHQ, but actually literally dozens of others, every major country in Europe is participating in the same system, is to see into the internet despite the wish of users and businesses to preserve security. Specifically, a quote from one of the Snowden documents: "Ubiquitous encryption on the internet is a major threat to NSA's ability to obtain digital network intelligence." DNI is not a term that's in computer science, but it's basically their inside term for tracking everything that happens on the internet. Specifically, transport layer security, TLS, voice encryption protocols, and virtual private networks, VPNs, are a major challenge to them, and they have tracked with dismay the increasing use and worked on ways to penetrate or defeat. Their arsenal is partly legal and partly technical. The context of this bill and similar legislation is not an accident. These things are orchestrated internationally. It wasn't always so. When Britain passed its first surveillance bill in the 1980s, encryption was not used by civil society. It was the preserve only of the military and government agencies. When we got the next law in the year 2000, we had, we thought, won the crypto wars. There was no attempt to ban encryption, and in fact it was only with difficulty that the government introduced a part of that law that allowed for the requirement to be made that judges could order suspects whose material had been received or taken as a raid to disclose their keys. I worked on some of these cases. I've seen in terrorist cases, because I also have a technical area. I work as an expert in the courts on computers and communications. And from experience of looking at those occasions on which persons accused of terrorism have been said to have used encrypting systems, they have been extremely simple, extremely facile, the kind of nonsense that people come up with all the time. They don't work. The powers were not necessary. The British government has made 3 attempts in the last 7 years to bring in new laws to allow for encryption to be attacked and internet surveillance to be increased. And we are currently going through a debate on many of the others. There are a series of extraordinary admissions that have been made in the last year by the British government, in fact a new policy, and perhaps it's an international policy covertly developed, which they call avowal. That's a more complicated English word meaning admission. They are confessing to what they have done in secret, using hugely extended legal powers to plant malware and introduce malware and to carry out hacking attacks. And in fact, the biggest and most notorious hacking attack by Britain, which has been documented, happened right here in Brussels to the Belgian communications provider Belgacom. The purpose was to break open their systems in order to break the encryption of people, and many of you will be in this category, who come into Belgium and are roaming onto networks that are protected by encryption. They wanted access to the core routers of the Belgacom system here in Belgium and abroad in order to break past the encryption. This kind of behavior, which one might have thought would have been attacked and robustly assaulted by the European Parliament institutions, is going to carry on and going to become explicitly lawful. And not just targeted attacks. The British government is seeking power to automatically deploy malware anywhere outside our shores or the 5 English-speaking allies. And not just that, they are seeking to extend their ability to surveil the internet by attacking anyone and everyone to whom they can get access to their computers. In other words, they are adopting the precise methods of criminal gangs who recruit bots in order to conduct cyber war attacks or to infiltrate institutions or exfiltrate data. The extent to which they regard it as proper to use the methods of criminals and to make anyone who is not living under the protection of an English-speaking country a legitimate target to simply exploit your computers is quite extraordinary. And in practical terms, it has extraordinary legal consequences. It's not even going to be transparent in Britain as to when this has happened. We're having an argument about how this might be dealt with in legal processes. But if you step abroad, if the British are running an operation to check a paedophile, and it suits them to access a paedophile site through an exploited bot computer belonging to a random person in a non-English-speaking country, people could be prosecuted. The undermining of the legal system and the effectiveness of evidence, and frankly, and I speak from some experience because I've been instructed in paedophile cases, the ability of defendants who may be guilty to legitimately say that what happened on their computers was the result of covert and unprovable intelligence agency attack is going to become factually possible because they merely have to point to British law. Previously, those kind of defenses by persons accused could commonly be thought of as denial, but in the new situation, they will not be. The organization of these attacks is not just between the 5 English-speaking countries, but 35 other third parties take part in the collection of data and the analysis of data and participate in covert foreign policy alliances, which results in a commonality of arguments in both countries and in all the countries that we have. It pops up not by accident. They infiltrate institutions in order to subvert standards. ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standard, the ITU, and the developers of new generation mobile communications equipment have all been targeted. In a summary, it's a big picture, a picture that makes people working in this area potential targets of the enterprise to defeat encryption. They call it SIGINT enabling SHUMINT. Signals intelligence, spying, enables the recruitment or subornment of target people to get further inside networks. And in turn, SHUMINT, individuals who have been suborned, corrupted, bribed, or compromised by that self-same access to their data into taking part in spying and breaking crypto. It's a very, very unsavory world that we confront. And I look forward to discussing it with colleagues and yourselves.
Thanks, Duncan. Bart.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to serve with such distinguished individuals on a panel. And I'm just a simple cryptographer. And in fact, I'm not a mathematician. My mathematician friends would laugh if I'd be called a mathematician. I'm an electrical engineer who happens to know some cryptography. And so I have some policy interest as well. So when the first crypto war broke out in the early 90s, in fact, people were not using cryptography. It was just coming into use. And as mentioned before, we thought we won it. But if we look today, in fact, we have massive use of cryptography. There is about 30 billion devices out there using cryptography. The first 18 billion are there to protect companies against users, or to protect governments against citizens, or to allow governments to identify citizens. Bank cards, access cards to buildings, updates for your device. You can argue it's also good for you, but in general, it's also to keep control of your device. And then the content protection. Pay TV systems, Blu-ray encryption. It's about 18 billion devices where crypto is used, in many cases, against the user. To not protect the user, but actually protect companies against the users. I have some slides about this. I'm not sure I want to show them, but if they're there, we can do this. So It's okay. Next slide. Okay. Of course, which crypto is protecting the users? And there is about 12 billion devices, so it doesn't sound so bad. But then if you look at the numbers, next slide, please. Okay. Anyway, 6 billion are GSM devices, mobile phones. There is crypto in your phone to protect the wireless part, but I have bad news. As soon as the crypto goes on the fixed wired part, there is no encryption anymore. There is no end-to-end encryption. That leaves about 6 billion potential users. About 3.5 billion is SSL browsers. It was really designed to protect your credit card number and e-commerce, but today it also protects your privacy because you visit many places. There is dozens of weaknesses in the SSL TLS ecosystem, and only after Snowden did the industry start scrambling to improve and solve some of those weaknesses. But there is still many, many available, and the root of the problem is the CAs, where there is actually they're used by governments to undermine the whole infrastructure. And if the root is bad, it doesn't matter what you do at the rest. Then we have two large applications, WhatsApp and Skype. Skype has 500 million users, and WhatsApp almost 1 billion. You know what happened to them? Skype was bought by Microsoft, and WhatsApp by Facebook. And we know from the Snowden documents that a bit after Microsoft bought Skype, it became possible to intercept Skype-to-Skype communications. Skype was a European vendor, peer-to-peer, was hard to intercept. It was bought, and suddenly it became easy to intercept. Is it a coincidence? Maybe you think so. What happened to WhatsApp? We don't know. 500 million encrypted hard disks. Most of you have encryption on their hard disk. What happens if you take out the hard disk and put it in a different machine? It still works. So there is encryption, but it's not there to protect you. And in fact, it's not activated. It doesn't protect you. If somebody wants to access your hard disk, this encryption does not help you at all. So the only hope we have today is the high-end smartphones have more encryption, protect data in the cloud, but we still are not allowed to see the full details. And of course, the Apples and the Googles defend it in the US courts, but this is for legal cases, but we don't know whether there is backdoors or not. So how have governments been fighting cryptography? They tried to forbid it initially, and then there was a key escrow debate. What we have seen, we thought we won the battle, but what we've seen actually today, I can do without the slides, it's okay. What we've seen today is that between 95 and last 20 years, more or less, crypto has been attacked by weak implementations. By just asking for the keys, you just ask Google to give its private SSL key, and if Google gives it, well, then you have it, and you can decrypt everything sent to Google. Okay, undermining standards, the famous dual EC story, and maybe even cryptanalysis breaking some stuff. So this is the things which probably most of us are aware of now. We kind of woke up very unhappily. We now have 30 billion crypto devices, but none of them actually has end-to-end secure encryption of user data, secure against intelligence agencies. But there is more mechanisms, like VPNs. The standard has 48 documents, and it's about several thousand pages. To even understand how the standard works, you have to spend a year. So how many secure implementations are there of VPNs, you believe? Not many, I'm afraid. Export controls still work to some extent. Some of the devices make a backup in the cloud for your convenience. Anybody installed Windows 10 recently? There is BitLocker there, hard disk encryption. But in case you lose your key, no problem, Microsoft will send a backup to its cloud, and so in case they need it, they can access it over there. And then, of course, there is a special software and hacking updates, and maybe Gus will say more about this. People have already spoken about hacking. And then there is hardware backdoors. This is more for targeted access, but that's what's been happening. And what we see today also is very hard to evaluate is soft pressure. So openly, of course, the big US corporations now defend their users and say we will protect their data, but what's happening behind the scenes and what kind of pressure is exerted on them to leave backdoors or to give some people special updates and so on and so on. So about backdoors, I don't know whether you've seen this, but if you travel to the US and you want to lock your suitcase, you have to have a TSA-approved lock. Okay? So here is the locks. They're now available on the internet. The golden keys have leaked. So now you can open everybody's suitcase by just producing those keys. We have seen similar things like the Vodafone incident when actually a backdoor in GSM was used by someone, we still don't know whom, to eavesdrop on who is who in the Greek society for an extended period of time. We had the Gemalto keys. I guess you heard about Gemalto's story, the SIM operator. So the British stole the keys from a large number of operators. But why could they do this? Because actually the French government insisted on a backdoor because they also wanted the keys from Gemalto. And this is the reason why these keys were available in the clear in the first place. And then, of course, if you've been following the press, the more interesting part is Juniper. The Juniper incident would be a whole lecture by itself. But what happened in Juniper is that they put in this famous dual EC DRBG backdoor, this backdoored random number generator. So they actually made a big announcement of vulnerabilities, but they never said what it really was. But then people reverse engineered this, and this came into the public in the last weeks. And so they actually used the IBG in such a way you could exploit the data, decrypt VPNs. But more interesting, at some moment, 2 years ago, somebody changed the backdoor into their backdoor. And so Juniper or the US government lost access, and somebody else got access for a short time. So what cryptographers have always been claiming, that backdoors will be abused, has now actually happened. Okay, so latest news, the only thing I want to mention is that the UK government is now pushing a key escrow protocol for end-to-end encryption in such a way that the government can have access. They've tried the same thing about 20 years ago. It didn't go anywhere, and now the Mikesake protocol is of a similar type. And then I want to conclude by discussing, or focusing on the real issues, repeating what some people have said before. So, in the newspeak, what the agencies say is we do targeted surveillance. What they really want to do is mass surveillance and then use Google-like filtering techniques to search in those and find correlations and connections. And some experts like Mr. Binney say it's not feasible, it doesn't work, but at least it seems to be very interesting. Why is it interesting? Well, how can we see this? For example, the German BND was even prepared to spy on German companies in exchange for access to those systems. So they can't be that useless. There must be some useful, if BND is even prepared to spy on German companies to get access to X-keyscore deep dive, it must be really interesting. Second thing has also already been mentioned, but I think it's important to stress it. Governments seems to prefer offense over defense, because with offense you can book short-term success, but people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. The economies that are most vulnerable to attacks, that are most automated, are actually spreading malware. I have on my laptop Stuxnet and all the other stuff. It's just on the internet. I don't even have time to look at it, but just in case I'm bored one evening, I can actually launch a variant of Stuxnet. And this is not really my area of research, it's there. And if I have it, there is many hundreds and thousands of people who have it too. And so I think we should call our governments to their responsibility for this. And the final point is, there is no European crypto policy. I've been twice invited for a panel on European crypto policy, and twice the panel has been cancelled before it could happen. So in fact, as a researcher, I had a network of excellence, and we produced a document, a bit like for medicines, a list of algorithms and their strength. If you want certain protection, what should you do? After the project ended, after 8 years, ENISA took up this document and published it every year. What happened in 2015? The British government asked ENISA to unpublish this document. So even basic advice on which crypto is secure and is not secure, they asked it to remove it from the internet. In the end, ENISA didn't give in, some wording were changed, but no new version will be published in 2016. The update of this document has been removed from the ENISA work program. So Europeans are not even allowed to get solid advice on crypto usage. Of course, I have a new project and I will produce a new update, but this project will end in a few years, and so we don't know what's going to happen. And I think finally, of course, already also said by Mr. Binney, is the metadata. Don't let us be diverted by the encryption debate. We should also find out how we can protect metadata. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. And Gus.
I must have been drunk when I asked to speak last on this panel. There's very little left to say. And to only repeat one speaker so far, Anna's opening point was probably the most poignant. I really can't believe we're still here talking about this crap. As Simon mentioned, I am pretty damn old, and so I was around the 1990s when we did fight the first crypto wars. And I don't think people realize how close it came. We almost lost. Not to say we won, but we almost lost. And it was because of the hard work of the tech community, of NGOs, and governments, actually. Some great government officials who fought really hard to push back on this narrative that crypto was bad and national security was necessary. It was only because of that we actually won. Industry ended up playing a very odd role in that period, and I think they will continue to have that odd role that we have to have a look at, but I'll come back to that in a second. The key way that we won in the 1990s is that we were able to define security differently than national security. We were able to say that we deserve security too. We get to determine the security of our data, of our systems, of the services we use. And again, I don't think you realize how close it was in the 1990s. Governments wanted to decide that for us. And the internet, as we know it today, would have been vastly different had we not won in the 1990s. Or sorry, not lost in the 1990s. But yeah, we're here again on the precipice, apparently, of another crypto war. It's like every generation almost needs to fight this fight to keep it alive. And I think the way we're going to win it again, or not lose it again, is with the narrative of we know what security is too. We can counter the intelligence agencies. We can counter those politicians who are afraid and just say we need to have access to everything, and say, well, no, we need security too. But the sad thing is we have a glimpse of the future already. We already know what it is that they're gunning for, that what governments are gunning for. And I actually don't believe we're facing a crypto war. I think there'll be elements of it, don't get me wrong, and some of the points raised by the previous speakers are very, very important. And we're seeing elements of the 1990s all over again, say with government standards being introduced with the ability to recover keys. But we've gotten a glimpse of what it is they want, and it comes in the form of the UK legislation, the draft legislation that was introduced a few months ago. There are a number of powers in there that, as Duncan mentioned, were avowals, where these aren't necessarily new powers, they're just finally admitting that they've been using these powers, and now they want to actually write it down in law and get the Queen to sign on it. And the two most problematic components of that are, first, the complicity of, requiring the complicity of industry, and second, hacking. Let me just deal with each for a second. Industry's always been this awkward player, and Bart's presentation pointed out in history where it's been a little bit awkward and sometimes downright dangerous and duplicitous. Under the British draft legislation, industry will be required to assist government to remove security on systems that contain your data. Industry anywhere in the world will also be required to assist the government in getting access to your devices. So it's entirely possible that, say, a mobile phone provider like an Apple or a Google could be requested by the UK government or ordered to issue an update just for your phone that reduces the security on your phone. Now just think of the awkwardness this creates for the Apples and the Googles. They will be complicit in the undermining of security on their own devices, or their own devices. They actually do see it as their devices, but on the devices that they sell. And they don't necessarily want to do that. Apple has in the past said that they do not issue individualized updates. It is an update for everybody. They don't craft a specific one for a specific user. So this would be a dramatic change in their practices. If Apple had to choose between building a backdoor into its systems that governments around the world could get access to and thereby undermine confidence in Apple's products, or secretly agree to issue specific updates to specific users to undermine the security of those specific devices, which would Apple have to choose between? Well, if it's a choice, because the law is mandating Apple or any other company anywhere in the world to actually have to comply with the British request, which, again, it appears, again, the government says this is not a new power, so this is what they've been doing all along, they just haven't had the law behind them in order to support it. So we're going to have to do some heavy scrutineering of security updates, of anything that's happening on our devices. And this goes to the core of the question for the future is, do we actually know what's going on in our devices? Do we actually have control over the security of our devices? We need to start demanding that even more. And that gets to my second point, which is about hacking. The draft legislation in the UK empowers the government to hack, to use thematic warrants to hack devices, which is essentially a general warrant. All iPhone users in London can be hacked under a thematic warrant. And they actually have a whole section on bulk hacking. So they want to be able to hack multiple devices around the world. They've had their heyday of mass surveillance, and they recognize that encryption might be getting in the way of it. They're not abandoning that hope of that mass surveillance. They're just going to deploy mass hacking capabilities under law, which they say is not a new power again. They're going to deploy that under law anywhere around the world and hack devices en masse. Going back to the question, do we know what's going on in our devices? Do we know which government at any moment in time is hacking our devices? And as I talk about all of this, and I talk about hacking devices, we're all thinking about phones, we're all thinking about laptops. Stop thinking about phones and laptops. Those are the boring technologies to hack. Think smart cities. Think smart cars. Think of everything that is becoming part of the Internet of Things. Think of the infrastructure of the future and ask, as the UK government says, if these are not new powers, are they in there already? And if it's not them, or if it is them, who else is in there already? And that's the new war that we have to fight. Not whether or not the keys are going to be stored somewhere under some protocol that nobody should be implementing. It is, what confidence do we have in the security of our devices? And it goes back to taking back the term security. The term national security has somehow become the definition of security again, and that is not the way it has to be. It just is. But we can turn that around and say, we demand security of our infrastructure. We demand security of our networks and our products and our devices. And they just can't have the toys that they want to play with again. Thanks.
Thank you, Gus. Before handing back to Anna to lead we've got some time for a discussion between all of us. Should I ask Ton from Bits of Freedom, just following on from Gus's call to action, civil society has been working on a document which is, I think it has the potential to be a real springboard to galvanize a lot more awareness of the crypto issues. So Ton, are you here? Aha. If you can just give us a minute or two and just tell us about this document.
We have some microphones.
Thank you. So, thank you, Simon, for this opportunity. So, I'm standing with my back to you, but all right, it's okay. As you already mentioned, the Dutch government took a rather nice stand on the use of encryption, and they said, well, in addition to what Gus said, they said, well, we have to have privacy, we have to have security. It's also quite good for the business. So there are like real opportunities in the Netherlands, and the Dutch government sees that opportunity to take a stand on encryption, and we think that is really good. So what we did next, at least my colleague did that. I'm here on behalf of him. He said, well, look, we have to implement that in Europe. We have to make it larger, because the Netherlands took a rather nice stand, and France also pointed to this stand, but we need to make it broader. So what we did, we made a position paper, and it will be it's almost finalized, and it will go public, I think, in a few weeks, on the site of edri.org. And it's about how we everybody here how we can work on getting crypto not being undermined and how we can pressure governments to take the right stand. And I know we have these hacking powers, but we also need to have governments taking a firm stand on the importance of using cryptography. So that's the main point. Thank you.
Thank you. So after these fascinating presentations, I think we now have about 10 minutes for questions and discussion. We have two microphones, and I invite you. Okay, maybe we will take a few questions. Here maybe.
Oh, yeah, he was gesturing to me, yes. Thank you so much. My name is Laura Ballard. I'm a policy analyst at the State Department. And I've been doing some research just in the history of sort of the US-UK interaction, and I've hit a wall, and I'm thinking this might be the right panel to break through this wall. In 2007, the Home Office brought into effect Part 3 of RIPA, which can compel decryption of data and also, in some instances, surrender of encryption keys. And my understanding is that child porn was actually one of the precipitating factors behind this provision being brought into effect. It was actually in RIPA in 2000, but it needed implementing regulations. And what I have read somewhere is that it was brought into effect in part because of the lobbying of British surveillance-related entities, but also somebody in the US government, and it wasn't well substantiated. I asked Susan Landau about it, who incidentally would be a great female panelist if you wanted one. You know, her work really focuses on the Clipper chip controversy. So, you know, from your panel, do you find that plausible? And who in the US government would do that? I mean, I'm at the State Department. I know it wasn't me. Is it FBI? Is it NSA? Do they have divergent interests? Somebody else in the Justice Department? And what do they gain from doing that?
Shall I take that one? The RIPA regulations are the British Regulation of Investigative Powers Act of 2000. And Chapter 3, to which you referred, is an enabling power for the judge to make an order that a person, typically somebody whose material has been seized, tell the keys. The power came in, was enabled late, not as late as 1987, because they had a lot of difficulty deciding how this could be done, and they still have difficulties. I've been involved personally in a case where an accused person under our terrorism law surrendered keys, and they weren't the right keys, and they didn't know what to do with that. Back in 2000, they created a special technical center supported by both the security service and the intelligence agencies to allow breaking. I am not aware, but I'll take the question to others on notice, of direct US intervention in the mid-2000s to require Britain to get on with it. There were cross-national collaborations on terrorism and on dealing with child porn, which were drivers, but I have no perception, as I sit here, of it being driven at the policy level or by United States intervention, and believe me, I'm sensitive to those things.
I was going to add a little thing. I mean, the cryptology, FBI does, if they have tough problems on cryptology, they depend on NSA. So NSA really is the driver for cryptology in the United States. So, and GCHQ and NSA work very closely together, and have since World War II for the Enigma for the Germans, and the JN25 and purple codes for the Japanese. So that was the formation of Five Eyes back then, and that's when the relationship really started. That's very close, and they work on all these crypto things, and it's really I think if anyone's behind it, they were involved.
Thanks, Anna. Robin Wilton from the Internet Society. Thanks to the whole panel. It's been a fantastic discussion. Bill, I was particularly grateful to you for explaining some of the design aspects that you put into place in your system, which you then described as having been taken out afterwards. Yeah. And I think you and Duncan will both be aware, in fact, probably the whole panel, that in the UK, there's this defense of the Investigatory Powers Bill on the basis that mass collection of data is somehow not surveillance, and that it's not surveillance until you look at it. I mean, it's kind of the Schrodinger's cat, approach to whether this is surveillance or not. You only know when you've opened the box. How would you suggest we counter that argument, other than by the famous Casper retort of bullshit?
I used the word, and I think Duncan published it, I used the word horseshit. Okay? So it's different from bullshit. They fall differently. But some you can pitch, others you can't. In Washington, they do a lot of chip pitching. If you're from the country, you know what that means, right? So, this is... the whole thing was insane from the beginning. I mean, the design we left, and this is still running software, and one of the people on the committee in the House of Lords challenged me for being out of it for 15 years. I looked at all the Snowden material. Everything that is going on there was the design we left them with. And in fact, when I read the 2009 NSA Inspector General's report covering the Stellar Wind program, which is domestic spying on U.S. citizens by the NSA, they talked about all the programs that Snowden was developing, and also, there was only one minor thing they changed or added to what we left them in 2001. So the whole design, everything is still there. That design includes what software that basically, when you take in bulk data, indexes against the graph, which is we call it the big ass graph, which simply builds relationships of everybody in the planet. So whoever you communicate with financially, on the phones, emails, short messages, any relationship you have with anybody, if you send it through the postal service, even that, it simply builds all those relationships, and then it maps every occurrence of every bit of data that's taken in against that graph. So that means I can pull you out, I can pick you, and say, I want to know what you did for any period of time. And it will pull all that back together and do a timeline on every transaction you had. That's called, we call that a profile of your community and your relationship with that community. That's automatically done with software. It's done on everybody and everything that's taken in. So that is, if that's not, and I call that a profile on everybody on the planet, because that's your profile of life, your electronic life. Okay. So I mean, whatever they're saying is horseshit.
Thank you. We have two more questions here, I think, quickly, since we have 5 minutes.
Yeah. I think you have it. Yeah.
I'm Preneel. I work for a new think tank called Data Ethics. You all point to the government as a big bad enemy, and of course it is a bad enemy, but I'm also worried about all the big data broking companies unfortunately sponsoring this conference. Can you point to any secure or quite secure, safe consumer products like phones we could point to, users could use? But just, I know nothing is secure, but just a little secure, better than Google Android or whatever, because it's very hard to have ordinary people focusing on this when we don't have any products to point to.
Maybe I could just give my one question. I'm from a Danish Consumer Council, and I would like to know if any of you see there is a little hope for more encryption in the new data protection regulation. Would that lead to more encryption with the new principle about security by default, privacy by default?
Can I just say something about encryption in general? My problem with a lot of the commercially available encryption systems is that they give you a key. That's your key as a person, and you use that key. That takes me back to the Venona and diplomatic code of the Soviet Union back in the late 40s or in the 50s. It was designed to be a one-time pad type of use, that is a key used once and only once. But because we were able to break into that in the 50s because they reused those keys. So it's like, I liken all these encryption systems that give you a key to use as a Venona system. That is, you have a one-time pad to use over and over again. So, I mean, the point is that creates its own weakness, no matter what it is.
I think there are systems which are more secure, but so what we've seen so far is if a system becomes widely used, it actually is being bought and then maybe changed. So there is a policy behind this. But of course, the advice is use standard crypto, make open source so that you can actually, it doesn't mean it's more secure, but at least you can inspect it for backdoors and you have a potential to detect this. Like an example is Signal. This is an open source, but it doesn't have many users. And if it has many users, it becomes to the 500 million or billion, then you will see the product may change. But so there is no mass solution. I think it's a call for on the industry to do this. There is some efforts like Black Phone. They try to, it's a silent circle. They try to do stuff. Of course, there is always security holes in there at some layer, but it's of course more secure than other things.
So yes, to what Bart just said, totally agree. But let me just take a different angle to it. The reason we don't promote a specific software as the solution is because what we find more fascinating, particularly because you come from the big data world, more fascinating about the future of big data is that it's about the data that you have no control over its emission. And no level of encryption is going to stop that from being emitted. So the big data when it comes to mobile phones is not the analysis of the content of your communications or the content of your phone, because that'll be encrypted by default within the next few years anyways. It will be from the metadata. And it will be from the metadata of sensor networks deployed around cities that you have no control over. And so that's the disempowering aspect for the consumer. So the consumer should be asking, more importantly, to have control over the generation of data. And that's the fundamental fight for the next few years, if you ask me.
And maybe on this point, if I may, to link with your question about the future data protection framework and the GDPR, I think there may be some hope if the privacy and data protection by design and by default options get applied and implemented in a sensible way, that could actually, should ideally limit the creation of this kind of inadvertent chattering of metadata.
To the colleague from the Internet Society, you've asked the question that could frankly be a two-day discussion. It's the fundamental question. Their argument, your communications, we hoover them up, we put them in databases, and you're not to be worried that they're sitting there. That is fundamentally wrong. It's wrong in the European jurisprudence. It's wrong in the philosophy of human nature. But that's the argument they put, and they get away with it. The counter to it, and it's hard to work through this, is the reason they want the bulk data to do non-targeted acquisition is to do target development. So what they've done is to substitute for the British redcoats coming in with their general warrants, the new kind of general warrant. It isn't, as they try to deceive us, about targeting particular individuals from which there is probable cause. It is about using algorithms of behavior to detect suspicion within the bulk data using the computers. That seems to be the big lie behind the so-called bulk collection idea.
And to follow on with that, that was one of the things I tried to argue with the committee about in the House of Lords, was that if you do a targeted approach, you can also include target development in that targeted approach, because then that defines meaningful zones of suspicion and relationships that in the bulk data as it's passing by, and you can use that to select that out. So you can do targeted development with a targeted, specifically targeted, focused attack on pulling in the information and collecting it. I wanted to say one other thing, and somebody earlier had mentioned that in the system, when you start out with an encryption, somewhere along the line it might get unencrypted and sent in the clear. That produces its own opportunities to get back into that system. So, I mean, there are many weaknesses, not just by the encryption itself, but also by the system transporting the encrypted message.
Thank you very much. I think we really need to wrap up now. So without further ado, maybe for Simon for the last remarks.
Thank you, Anna. And just very briefly, I won't. Clearly, this is a mess, and clearly we've got a lot of thinking to do and a lot of action that we need to undertake. And what I would like to, on behalf of the panel, say as a challenge is, while you're here, ask yourself this: If there have been global scandals over General Motors building vulnerabilities into motor safety, this is the Ralph Nader era, and industry, the oil industry building vulnerabilities into environmental protective measures, which have caused massive scandals, what messaging do we need to put out? What action do we need to undertake to get a similar public response to vulnerabilities in data and communications? I think there is a role that this conference can play in terms of that messaging and that action plan. So please keep that in mind and talk about it. What I'd like to do now is to thank Anna, thank the speakers for a wonderful contribution today. Thank you.